Okay, so today we're going to talk about anti-heroes, antagonists, and villains. We're going to be talking about the difference between each one and why some of them blur together. Because there is a very blurry line, and sometimes one can even shift between multiple different things within a series or within a book. So it's incredibly important to be able to not only identify this, but know how to write it well. Um, before I get started, after the introduction, please remember to fill out the survey. For those of you watching this YouTube video, the survey is down below. Please try to answer by the 16th of January 2025. This is just for let me know what teen writers want and what teen writers having at the American Fork Library. So if you come to the American Fork Library and if you enjoy these videos, please respond to that survey and let me know what you would like at the American Fork Library for us to provide for our teen writers. I will also be doing the same thing for the adults if you're an adult watching this, so go to the adult video and click on that survey instead. Moving on. So we are going to start by defining these terms. So, antagonist. An antagonist is someone who causes problems for the character. They have the opposite goals of the protagonist. But just because they have the opposite goals of the protagonist does not necessarily make them a villain. That is technically different. We're going to give examples of just antagonists and just villains and how they're different here in a second. Villains, however, oppose the goals of the hero, but the difference is that villains oppose the goal of the hero and are always malicious. They mean the hero harm, and they mean the world harm, and they mean other people harm, even if their goals are good. For example, you could have a villain whose goal, like Thanos, is to make the world a better place, but he also murdered half of the universe to do so. So his goals were malicious, even though he had a good goal at the end zone of having a better, more healthy world. He ultimately had malicious ways of going about it. He would be an antagonist if he was just like, hey, let's make the world a better place, and in the process, I'm going to start like killing off a bunch of people who I think are making it a worse place. That would be more antagonistic or possibly even anti-hero. But because he just did it at random and believed that what he was doing was good no matter what other people said, his intent was malicious. Next thing is anti-hero. Now, an anti-hero is someone who is guided by good intentions, but then makes questionable, morally gray decisions in the name of justice and goodness. Now, if Thanos had been doing it because he was purely a good person at heart, that would be different. But he literally killed, maimed, injured, murdered anyone who got in his way. That makes him a villain. However, you could argue that he is in fact an anti-hero if you do see him as truly saving the world by killing half the population, in which case he's an anti-hero. But that's, again, a vague thing. That's why these are hard to define. Anti-heroes, though, typically are morally gray in their decisions, but ultimately are doing it for the purpose of justice and goodness, and what they do arguably is just and good. That being said, this is what leads antagonists to become anti-heroes, anti-heroes to become antagonists, and what makes antagonists to become villains. This line that they cross, this is what ultimately defines which role they sit in. Crossing this line into either going towards redemption and becoming a good guy, or into realizing that they aren't a good guy and wanting to tear everything down, that is what changes where their role is. Okay. So, first we're going to talk about examples of people who are what they are. Some of these do change intermittently because, like all good characters, they do sometimes shift. However, they are 90% of the time this thing. First villain that I'm going to give an example of, if you do not know her, feel free to just Google it really quick. Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender. 100% psychotic villain, right? She's not an antagonist. She is an antagonist. She's technically both. She's an antagonist and a villain. But if you had to pick one, I'd say villain, because antagonist is ultimately against the goals of the hero, which though she is, her intent is always malicious, which is what pulls her into the side of being a villain. If she was against the hero but wasn't necessarily trying to be malicious against the hero, that would make her an antagonist. She is simply a villain most of the time. There are a few moments where you question because she is a dimensional character and she has a lot of depth. But just because a character has depth does not make them any less a villain in the long run. You're looking at the majority of their actions, not the minority. You can have a villain who's sympathetic because ultimately they have good goals, or they were abused as a child, or fill in the blank. But at the same time, just because they are sympathetic does not necessarily make them any less of a villain character. In fact, I would say make your villain slightly sympathetic because just having them be all powerful evil can get kind of boring. Although there's nothing wrong with that too. Sauron is a great bad guy, and he's literally just the epitome of evil in freaking Lord of the Rings. So you can do either. Another great example of another example that we're going to move on to is antagonist. A great example of just an antagonist is Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. He is not a villain. He is not trying to be malicious. He is just trying to prove to his parents that he is worthy of their love and affection. He is trying to prove himself to them. And therefore, he does some bad things. But he ultimately is mostly just getting in the way of Harry Potter and doesn't like Harry Potter, and therefore bullies him and gets in the way, making him an antagonist. But he's not the villain, right? If you had to compare him and Voldemort, Voldemort is clearly the villain because he is malicious and wishes to kill Harry Potter and kill other people. Whereas Draco doesn't actually want to kill anyone. He just wants to stop them in the process of what they are doing and prove to his parents in the process that he is a good kid. That being said, with him being an antagonist, that's what makes Harry Potter and the Cursed Child so interesting, because Draco Malfoy's a lot more soft in that one, because of the fact that he's no longer under the influence of his psychotic parents. And so as a result, he's less of an antagonist. Ultimately, antagonists are people who, if you take the thing that is making them an antagonist away, they might be a hero or maybe an anti-hero or maybe even a hero. Whereas someone who is a villain, if you take what makes them an antagonist away, they are still a horrible person. Last thing that we're going to talk about with clear definitions before we move into people who shift around and are good examples of shifting character roles is anti-hero. Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. He is not a good person. Let's be clear on that. He does all sorts of things in the name of saving himself and of saving others, but mostly himself. Um, he has saved people. He has definitely made some good decisions. He has definitely done some things that warrant him being a hero. But he has also done a lot of questionable things. A lot of things that make you go, buddy. He steals things, he pillages things, he plunders things, he makes sure that other people are like blackmailed into doing certain things. He freaking steals people in order to get his own debts paid off. Like, he's not a terribly good person. But ultimately, he does try to do good things overall, even if his morals are questionable and he sometimes leans a little harder towards being more of a rebel. But he's never truly a bad person, and he never gets in the way of the protagonist. The protagonist in the first movie, first three technically, being Elizabeth Swann. He never actually gets in the way of Elizabeth Swann's goals. In fact, most of the time, he's trying to help Elizabeth Swann. However, he also is trying to help himself and therefore sometimes gets in the way or sometimes makes questionable moral decisions in order to get things done. Now, moving on to people who can be shifting and considered other things. For these ones, I actually, if you if you would like to. I would love to know your thoughts as to what you think the line that they crossed is, when they became something else, if you know what I'm referring to. So the first one we're going to talk about is Zuko. Classic example of someone who shifts through many, many different roles throughout his time there. How many of you would actually say that he is a villain when he starts out? Or would you call him an antagonist? Thoughts? How many think villain? Raise your hand. How many think he's simply an antagonist when he starts the series? Raise your hand.
I kind of think both.
Both? Why do you say both?
Because is as both the antagonist, he's simply getting persuaded to E.
This is true.
And the villain part would be trying to kidnap and kill him.
This is true. In the very beginning of the series, he does actually actively try to maliciously kill and hurt the Avatar. Whereas later on in the series, he does do a lot more of just like, okay, what if we just like made the Avatar in prison? Don't have to murder? And so I would agree with you there. He is actively getting in their way, antagonist, but he is also actively trying to kill him in the beginning, villain. After a while, he starts to shift to become more antagonistic and less villainous. Does anyone know precisely kind of what makes him feel less of a villain or want to be less of a villain? What do you think? No wrong answers here, just opinions. Character development's hard.
I think after the whole invasion, the North Pole region, I don't know what place.
I would agree. I would agree. The invasion of the North Pole absolutely does make him reconsider, especially considering the Avatar chooses to save his life when this whole time he's been trying to kill him. And he realizes, why should I kill someone who's a good person? I'm just killing him because my dad told me to. And he starts to question what actually is the right thing here. And then he becomes more of an antagonist because he still wants to make his dad proud, but he also doesn't want the Avatar to succeed as a result of that. So he starts becoming more antagonistic, where he's getting in their way, but not actively trying to harm them in any way. What would you guys say is the moving point from being an antagonist, actively going against the Avatar and his group, to being more of an anti-hero? Take a minute to think. Any thoughts, or should I divulge what my thoughts are?
I think maybe after the whole invasion of the solar, no, solar eclipse, I think it was something like that.
I would say right around that time.
Around that.
I would agree with that because that whole time he's kind of going against him, but then he finally realizes his father's not a good person and maybe he shouldn't be continuing to follow his father. This is kind of when he starts, just before that, starts doing his blue spirit thing, right? Where he starts like um, going around doing crazy stuff dressed up as the blue spirit. But then after the solar eclipse, I think he starts realizing that his family isn't exactly doing what's best for the country. They're doing what's best for themselves. Um, I would agree with that. And then moving from that anti-hero kind of doesn't know how to be a good person, the classic line that we all love, why am I so bad at being good? Um, where he's trying so hard to be good, but he's ending up being an anti-hero because of the fact that he can't quite figure out how to hero right. And then he starts learning from the Avatar and his friends how to be more of a hero. And that's when he finally transitions into his last phase of being a hero. This is part of the reason why redemption arcs take so long. You can't just one chapter, redemption arc, poof, all better. because with true real life people and in-depth characters, it's gonna take time because they have to go through all those phases. They can't, it's kind of like grief. You can't just be like, I feel all better now. Like, you have to go through the stages. And it's the same thing here. If they start out as a villain and end as a hero, they need to go through all the stages to get them there. All right. Next one that I would like to mention is villain to antagonist to anti-hero again. And it is Loki from the Marvel series. In the very first Avengers movie, he is a pain in the butt. He is clearly a villain. He's not just an antagonist, he is a villain. He is trying to enslave people and murder them with aliens. That is generally a bad person. He is doing so, though, because he believes that he truly should be a king. His motives are not pure. His motives are power. His motives are power hunger. Rather than looking for good and justice, he just wants power. That's what makes him a villain, is the fact that his intent is malicious and his goals are not good. He ultimately ends up switching to an antagonist, though, where he is against the idea of Thor doing all these good things as being a king, and he tries to stop him from doing all these things so that way he can continue to take over. But he's not actively being malicious anymore. He, in fact, sometimes even helps Thor in the next few movies, right? Granted, he also mocks the heck out of him and does some trickery trickness. Um, but at the same time, all of those actions are in the name of trying to get power again. So he is still on that edge of being like, I don't have great goals, I don't have great motives, but I'm also not going to try to kill you or hurt anyone or enslave anyone anymore. I'm simply just going to continue to seek after myself and my own motives, even if that's getting in your way. Then finally, I haven't watched the second season, so please bear with me. You get the Loki TV series, right? And then the first season, at least, I haven't seen the second season, so please, no spoilers. In the first season, he becomes more of an anti-hero, right? Where he realizes that there's a lot of things he's screwed up. And he continues to screw up because he's morally gray. But at the same time, he is actually actively trying to save the world. He's actually trying to save people. He's actually trying to make the world a better place. Even though he is messed up and makes some bad decisions in the process. He never truly becomes a hero, but there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with ending at anti-hero, especially because some people genuinely will never lose that morally grayness. Some people, they just can't be a hero. They have to be morally gray because they don't know any other way to be. As far as this goes, I would say that the main thing that makes a good any of these anti-hero, antagonist, villain is motive. What is their motive? For a villain, it should be something malicious and horrible. For example, like Azula, I want to take over the world and kill anyone who stands in my way, including my own brother. Psycho. Um, Definitely a villain. That's her motive. It's just power and making sure that she's the best, most powerful person she can possibly be. Whereas antagonists like Draco Malfoy have bad motives, but they're not necessarily bad motives. They're just misguided motives. Um, so, for example, with Draco Malfoy, his misguided motive is believing that proving he is worthy to his parents is the best thing for him. Ultimately, the best thing for him would be to get the heck out of there. His parents are crazy. Um, but he doesn't think that because he's a kid, right? As a kid, you want to make your parents happy. You want to make them proud. And so the idea that he becomes an antagonist because he wants to make his parents proud makes perfect sense. Um, there are other great examples of antagonists. However, this was the one that I felt you guys could probably best relate to. Um, Most of the ones that I looked on the Google list, I was like, these are either too old or you probably have never seen it. Then you have, like I said, the anti-hero. Captain Jack Sparrow's motive, he has three motives. Booze, getting more alcohol, money, and getting the Black Pearl back. Those are his three motives most of the time. He just wants to go drink, have money, have a nice ship. That's all he wants. But in the process, he ends up ultimately helping people because he ends up caring about them. If you are someone that Jack Sparrow cares about, he actually does a great amount of good trying to help them. But the problem is that he kind of really only cares about himself. So it's really difficult trying to get him to care about you because he's kind of a narcissist. That's part of what makes him an anti-hero is the fact that his morals are a little skewed because his morals are how do I get something that's good for me and me only. There's nothing wrong with getting stuff that's good for you. It's good to take care of yourself. But at the same time, if you only take care of yourself, that's also bad. Which is what makes him ambiguous because he doesn't only take care of himself, but he also is pretty highly self motivated. And as a result, he believes that whether he has to steal something, blackmail people, kill people, as long as he can get that good thing for himself and those he cares about. For a great example of this would be I believe it's the fourth movie, Stranger Tides, where he has a former lover who he really actually still cares about. And the whole Fountain of Youth, the way it works is it steals life from another person. And so when he realizes that his lover is trying to give away her life for her father, who is a horrible, nasty person, he ultimately betrays her and gives the wrong cup to the wrong person, making it so that the father dies and gives life instead to her because of the fact that he cares about her. Now, was that necessarily the right decision? I don't know. That depends on whether or not you believe you should be true to your word or whether you should be true to the best person, in which case he did do the right thing because her dad was a terrible person. But it all depends on how you look at it. It's about the gray morals. As far as characters who morph and shift, like Zuko and Loki, the best thing you can do here is change their motives throughout, or give them something that makes them question their motives. Like with Zuko, that attack on the North Pole and the fact that the Avatar chose to save his life absolutely made him go, okay, whoa, I need to reevaluate how I'm doing things. I need to reevaluate my motives. I need to look again at what I'm doing and whether or not it's worth it. That ultimately is going to be what makes a good anti hero, antagonist, or villain. Yes, motives are helpful with heroes, but the difference is that with heroes, it's pretty obvious. I want to have truth and goodness and justice. Ha ha! Those are pretty basic. With anti heroes, antagonists, and villains, it's actually a lot more complex because you have to think deeper about the human psyche. You have to think deeper about what makes people tick and what would make them change if they're going to change. as as far as things go with turning points, make sure that whatever you're using to lure them would actually lure them. So, for example, with Captain Jack Sparrow, if you had someone who was just like a perfect goody two shoes, he's probably not going to care about them and probably going to leave them behind. However, if they are a little morally gray, kind of like Elizabeth Swann, and that they are going to, save the seas from a bunch of other crazy pirates, he's like, yeah, I want to be one of the only one and only pirates. So if you're going to kill all the other pirates, dope. That's something that he cares about, and therefore he will care more about her because she's helping him get towards those goals. Do you guys have any questions about writing good anti heroes, antagonists, or villains? No? No? I've gotten two no's. How about you?
And this like the villain's motive has to be bad, or like does but like they do bad things to try to get to their motive then?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I would say, kind of like we talked about with Thanos in the beginning, they don't necessarily have to have a bad motive just so long as they are doing bad things to get there. Thanos' motive is actually very admirable. The fact that he's like, the planets are dying off because of overpollution, the best thing to fix that, less people to pollute it. That's actually not bad as far as a motive. The problem is his solution is screwed up. So you can absolutely have a villain that has like, hey, I want to make sure that no one ever does anything bad again. But then their solution is to murder anyone who ever lies in their entire life, including little children. That's messed up. So you can have them still be a villain and not necessarily have a bad motive. Um, Having good motives though and a bad execution is tricky. Part of the reason it's tricky is because you've got to look at what would make them go to those lengths. Because most of the time they don't start there, right? Most of the time they start out small. Like Thanos, if they ever did a comic or a like prequel movie about his life, I bet you it would go something like this, based on the little that we know about him. Based on the little that we know about him, he claimed to have tried to save his planet, right? By telling them all, hey, we need to somehow cause less pollution, cause less problems, and fix this. And they said, who cares about you? He probably went the anti hero route and started being like, okay, then let's kill off some people who are bad people and fix it that way. I bet that's probably where he started. And then he moved into the antagonist route when people started being like, bro, you can't just go around killing people. And he's like, but I'm killing bad people, so who cares? And then he started realizing they weren't going to listen to him, and finally realized the only way they were going to listen is by force, leading him to go down a villainous path. So I would say yes, absolutely. Your villains can have good motives. In some ways, those are the best villains because they are incredibly well done and have a lot of depth. The only problem is that you need to make sure that even if you don't show that journey, you show that they have conviction and they have a reason for that conviction. Like with Thanos, even though we didn't see his journey, we saw that he mentioned this whole planet was destroyed because they didn't listen to me. That gave us a root for why he was so convicted that he had to kill everyone in order to make it work. So I so long story short, answer your question. Yes, they can have good motives, but if you are going to make them a villain with good motives, you've got to have a reason why they're doing villainous things and not just being an anti-hero. Because most people go towards anti-hero. They don't just go from I'm a great person to murder everyone. Generally, it's a downhill slide, not just a teleport. Um, any other questions about writing good anti-heroes, antagonists, or villains? We all good? Okay. Please remember to fill out the survey so that way I can know more about what you guys want and what you guys are hoping for with the Teen Writers Club. It will be attached to this video if you, for whatever reason, didn't receive my email, or if you did, it should be in the email that you received. And if you are about ready to turn 18 and would like to fill out the adult one as well, you are more than welcome to fill out both. Um, As far as the next contest goes, the next contest is going to be write a fantasy themed short story about a character encountering a mysterious waterfall. Feel free to elaborate from there however you would like. Keep in mind the word count has gone down because fortunately and unfortunately, we've had a ton of entries, but that means that we have less time to read them. So we had to cut down on word count. It is now a word count limit of 3,000. If you are over 3,000, I am sorry, but you will be disqualified. We will still read your story, we will still give you feedback on it, but we will not actually put you in the running for winning, even if you have a fantastic story. Um, I'm going to turn off the video now. Let me know if you have any other questions and comment below if you have other further questions.